Good afternoon, and thank you very much indeed for joining us. You're watching Inside Government live from Broadcasting House. Before we get into the topic of discussion for the day, I just want to give you some updates coming from the State House. The President has just addressed the nation. That's about 15 or so minutes ago. And if you allow me, I'm going to take you through some of the highlights of what the President has said. That following the decisions or the issues that the country has faced in the last 2 weeks. The budget is going to be reduced by 346 billion shillings, but the President or the government has talked to the National Assembly, and this budget is going to be reduced by 177 billion shillings, and the difference is going to be borrowed, which is going to affect Kenya's debt position or fiscal deficit from 3.3% to 4.6%. And the borrowed funds will go towards hiring of junior secondary school teachers and medical interns, funding the milk stabilization program for dairy farmers, reviving stalled road programs, settling the debt owed to farmers in the country in the coffee subsector, capitalizing the coffee cherry fund, and as well as retaining the fertilizer subsidy. Something else that has come up from that briefing is that the President has announced that with immediate effect, 47 parastatals are going to be merged and their operations transferred to the allied ministries, and these include the staff as well as their operations and budget. Another announcement coming from the House on the Hill is that the decision to fill the positions of chief administrative secretaries is hereby suspended with immediate effect. Another pronouncement is that the number of advisors in government shall be reduced by 50% within the public service with immediate effect. Something else is the budget lines providing for the operations of the offices of the First Lady, the spouses of the Deputy President, and the Prime Cabinet Secretary has or shall be removed. Something else, the budget provisions for confidential budgets, various executive offices, including the President of the Office of the President, has been reduced by 50%. So those are some of the issues that the President has just announced in his latest address to the nation, which just happened about 20 minutes ago. We'll give you more details in our subsequent bulletins. You're watching Inside Government. Allow me to highlight something that is very well captured in our Vision 2030. And I'm always very proud about the Vision 2030 because it's Kenya's long-term economic blueprint. It talks about research and innovation. And when you look at that document, it says that R&D is a catalyst, or is going to be a catalyst of economic development by the time we get to the year 2030. It talks about increasing allocation to R&D from 0.8% to about 2%. We're still off the mark. And the question is, what do we need to do in a bid to upscale funding to research and development together with innovation? And how do we commercialize innovation? Joining me this afternoon is the CEO of the Kenya Innovation Agency. This is a government institution whose mandate is to harness innovation in the public service as well as in the private sector to ensure that we become an innovative country. Bearing in mind that Kenya is one of the most innovative countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you very much indeed, TONNY OMWANSA, for joining us on Inside Government. I just want you, first of all, to give us a brief of what is the status of research and development together with innovation in Kenya.
Thanks, O'Brien, for having me here. It's really a great opportunity, and I'm always excited to come back as we have various conversations. So let's start. First of all, you've put it in proper context, that the aspiration behind the Vision 2030, there is a pillar around economic development, recognizing that wealth is created. It does not just arrive. And we do research, we support inventions because we want to create new possibilities based on what consumers need or want, and in the process create products and services that then people consume. From government, as a result of that Vision 2030 framework, institutions were created to guide the policy issues, the infrastructure issues, the funding issues, to catalyze research, science, technology, and innovation for economic prosperity. Mm-hmm. How well we have done, we are yet to get onto a proper scoring mechanism, but there's meaningful ground that has been covered in the establishment of the institutions and funding of research. One of the areas that are relatively weak is data management as to the effect of all these interventions. And secondly, is how substantive the funding of research has been, and not just research for the sake of it, but research for commercial value ultimately. And that's why you talk about R&D and commercialization of research output. And I believe we'll have an opportunity to discuss a lot more in this. But I do think that we have made very meaningful progress when you compare with many other countries, especially in the region. But I also think there is so much ground to be covered when you try to benchmark yourself with the world leaders. Yeah.
When you look at Kenya today, and I just want to alienate myself to the public service.
Yeah.
Would you say that the public service in Kenya is managed through research and innovation?
I think the extent to which it should is a lot more than what is. Probably that's a better way to look at it. I think that the room as to how much tech and innovation should drive public service is so significant compared to how much ground we have covered. And there is a lot of effort to try and narrow that gap. But just to answer in a nutshell, I would say we haven't transitioned yet meaningfully and in an impactful way that then creates a lot of opportunities for a lot more people and serves people in amazing way. You know, look at it this way. We are digitizing services, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, and we are improving the quality of service, you know, to people. But when you think about how accessible then the services become based on the policy framework and the operational frameworks that exist, you acknowledge that there is still room for improvement. We could list a number of initiatives that have succeeded very well in terms of how service is now rendered and how automation has translated. But then we still have quite some ground to cover. There are a couple of conferences, for example, or events that we've attended where government showcase, for example, the you know, in Europe or if you went to Dubai, and kind of experience how public service gets, you know, automated and digitized. It's mind-boggling because government actually becomes more effective in service than even private sector as a result of adoption of tech for public service.
I do agree with you that it's true. As a matter of fact, you know, Kenya has covered, you know, tremendous ground when it comes to embedding technology and innovation in public service. But we are yet to beat that corner. Why would you say there has been slow adoption of innovation in the government?
From where I stand, you know, I've been an academic and therefore I have opportunities to analyze things with a lot of rigor. You know, there are several things that make technology serve. Remember, technology is a means, or ICT for that matter, if we were to use it, is a means to something. So you've set out your goal that you want to enhance public service using technological solutions. One, technological solutions will reduce inefficiencies. Now, you know, there are some people who actually thrive on inefficiencies, or they remain relevant because there is an inefficient system. And these people, if they realize that you're introducing technological solutions to enhance efficiency, they can resist. All right. So resistance to change is one factor in some cases. Second, I tend to observe that skills is another perspective. How proficient people become in using technology for service is another. The third, I would say, is a little bit of an attitude. Where if you have a group of people who feel that they are unable to uptake technology by themselves, by this I mean, I might say, oh, well, I'm not technology is for the young generation. So for me, I'm not going to get into this. I'll continue serving people the way I normally serve, or I'll prepare my solutions in the way I normally do. So that attitude, and it could be a little more of the culture. You know, I learned a very interesting experience about Singapore, where they've actually introduced grants for people who are 40 years and above to go for training on emerging trends and technological solutions for service. And it's a grant for anybody who is 40 years and above. So that's another classic example that, you know, there could be resistance because of, you know, feeling that either it is not my time, or I am too old, or I don't have the skills, or I will be disadvantaged if I take up these technologies, and so on and so forth. Finally, I would say it's about the level of investment on the technology and solutions in the public service. So classic example would be, if I walk to any public institution now, would I easily access connectivity? Will it be up and running all the time? Would I log into any portal right now and access the services that I need? You know, to be honest, just a few days ago, we were having a conversation about how do we improve the usability, usefulness, and user-friendliness. You know, there are 3 dimensions to it, of a portal, for example, a State Department portal. All right? So if I have a youth State Department portal, then I want to kind of find it very useful for me as a youth, all right, that it is usable and it is user-friendly, just as an example. And there can be several other. So that transition of being an effective portal for me as a citizen is a journey that we still haven't completed in terms of how well do we design some of the systems to be as usable, user-friendly, and useful to the public.
I just want to hear this from you. As a country, we have multiple institutions whose business is to drive research and development together with innovation. And I'll start with the institution, which is Kenya Innovation Agency. We have the National Commission for Science, Technology and Innovation. We have the Konza Technopolis. Correct. We have Kenya Industrial Research and Development Authority, Institute, that is KILDI. And many others. We also have departments within ministries whose business is to drive research and innovation. Why are we still wanting when it comes to the implementation of technological innovations in Kenya?
Okay, so you've asked kind of like a couple of elements in that question, and I think it's a great question to ask. You know, a while back we used to have a ministry that oversaw science, technology, and innovation. You know, in government,
for the Ministry of Education.
Exactly. So it was higher education, science, technology, and innovation.
Yeah.
And in government, when you want to drive an agenda aggressively, you need to position appropriately. Now, we did not have, in the last 10 or so years, actually now 12, we did not have a ministry that coordinates that kind of effort. Okay, so we've had a State Department for Higher Education, Science and Technology, and that has driven the research, but that State Department includes all the universities that you would need. That has a bearing on the effectiveness, because research and innovation is a cross-cutting matter. Now, if you scatter the entities that drive the different components across different ministries, then efficiency significantly drops. And I think that's a challenge that we've had, and maybe we do have an opportunity to try and fix it. I'd like you to see innovation, science, technology, and innovation as a value chain. You start with the policy issues that go with it, go into basic research, and move up the value chain of research outputs as they are developed into commercial value and create enterprises and solutions in public. Now, if you don't process it as a value chain, what you will end up doing is doing small bits in different corners. So for me, Kenya's challenge now is not the appreciation of science, technology, and innovation and research and the perspectives that go with it. It's about thinking through the value chain. A classic example is how the US has organized a system. They've got an act that speaks into the value chain. The end of the value chain is commercialization. And by law, you are expected to commercialize. That's not the case for us. Now, we have pumped in a lot of money for research, and we have very meaningful research outputs if I go into research centers like Kirdi, if I go into Calro or Kemri, and so on and so forth. You'll find a lot of research outputs. If you go into the universities, you will find the research outputs. But is there a requirement that you must commercialize? No. It's a nice thing to do if you want to. If you're ambitious, you can attract partners and so on and so forth. Is there an incentives to create enterprises out of research outputs? The answer is no. And this is a wake-up call for some of us who have been involved in shaping that ecosystem. So I have listed two issues that we're struggling with. We are not thinking of it in terms of a value chain. And you come into realization of some of these things over time. Because when you say Kirdi, for example, it's going to be in the Ministry of Industrialization and so forth. Yes. If you say KIPI, that do intellectual property protection, if you say Kenya Copyright Board, where would you find it? If you get the Kenya National Innovation Agency, you'll find it in the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Arts. If you take National Research Fund, you'll find it in Ministry of Education. You've mentioned NACOST, you'll find it in Ministry of Education. So that's not a value chain.
And all these institutions are into research and innovation.
Yeah, they play different roles because you do need the regulation, you do need the registration of intellectual property, you do need the funding, you do need the infrastructure. Like Kiridi is an amazing place for prototyping and development of minimum viable products out of research outputs. Excellent. But when does the CEO of Kiridi speak to the CEO of NRF? What's the platform? There's no mechanism in place. It's because we don't think of it as a value chain. We think of it as institutions, and we set the institutions based on where we think. This concept of ministries, let's put it this way. We work in terms of you report to a state department, and the state department is within a certain ministry. If you need to have conversations in another ministry, then you need to ask you what gives you authority to do so. So you have to go up to the PS, to the CS, speak across.
You have to go through the government's bureaucracy system.
The system, and then it comes back. So you can't be efficient and you can't be effective. So the value chain is a big issue. And second is to think about what are the incentives, whether they are carrots or sticks, to create commercial value out of research. Those two are missing.
The president is talking about merging.
Yes.
And dropping some 47 parastatals.
Yes.
Is it high time that we rethink the space of research and innovation and the institutions and the players they are in, and we reimagine this system or this space, and we bring some of these institutions together?
If you ask me, the answer is absolutely yes. But the question would be why and what new value are we going to create? And if our thought process is in the value chain, for example, I talk about technology readiness levels. It's a globally recognized framework that moves technological solutions from level 1 to level 9. Now, what is in level 1 and level 2 is basic research and applied research. And then you move into creation of prototypes and minimum viable products, and then you create enterprises, and then you move into private sector funding, because once solutions become very meaningful, you do need private sector to scale. Now, if we are organizing and merging them within the thought process of a value chain, all right, then I think we're going to be very, very effective. So the answer is yes, as a matter of principle, but more importantly is now how we step back and we organize for efficiency and effectiveness and for specific outputs, all right, and impact. Because look, take it home, science, technology, and innovation is about wealth creation, is about national security, is about new solutions, jobs, wealth, and global competitiveness. That's the language. And for you to do that, you do need to think through the value chain, number one, and you do need to think effectively through the incentives. For me, whether it was one institution or 10 institutions is probably not the big problem. The bigger problem is how do we organize for the greater impact? Because what happens is that if you look at the levels 1 and 2, is you have a national research fund. This is what funds basic research and applied research. When you have an innovation agency, it's about trying to develop some of those solutions into public good, into startups, into products, and so on and so forth. And you do need the regulation, you do need the intellectual property protection, and so on and so forth. So you need to think about it, you lump them together and make sure that they feed to each other and have the appropriate legislation that enforces some of the incentives and some of the minimum requirements for the participants in this area.
You see, when you look through government programs, policies, and intentions, I mean, you clearly see that the government has somehow been strategic when it comes to driving research, driving innovation, and the application of the same. And no wonder we have a number of institutions of higher learning, like Jomo Kenyatta University of Science and Technology. You know, we have Maseno. You have a KIMANI University. You have Konza. You have Kenya, and many other institutions. Yeah. So where is the disconnect?
For me, for the time that I've been in government, it's a little about 3 years now, and I really am very committed to the issues of creating innovations out of ideas and research outputs and having the appropriate framework that enables that to happen. I would say that part of the disconnect has to do with what is your requirement to create startups. So let's take an example. That's a main point, and I will articulate it and explain it using a few examples. What is our national requirement to create startups, joint ventures, and spin-offs as a result of research and innovations and inventions? What's the requirement? So let's take an example. Can I be in a university, and you've mentioned Jomo Kenyatta for that matter, can Jomo Kenyatta actually own a startup? The answer will be
business.
Yeah.
Their core business is education.
Exactly. So if you should, I mean, typically a university should have shares in several startups. It should be a requirement of a university to produce startups on a yearly basis. But if you ask a typical professor in a university, what are the things you're evaluated against? They'll tell you publications, they'll tell you teaching, they'll tell you research grants, and so on and so forth. But when is it going to be a requirement for you as a vice chancellor or as a researcher to actually create startups? Ask any vice chancellor right now or any research institution and tell them, what's your target of startups per year? And what is your framework to get it done? That requires leadership, it requires funding, it requires incentives, it requires facilities. You need incubation centers, accelerators. You need to work closely with venture capitalists and angel investment. That is not happening in a traditional form at a university setting. Now, if you multiply one university by the number of universities that we've got and how much funding is going to research in that case and how much prototyping is maybe happening, there's huge potential to create lots and lots of solutions out of that university ecosystem, as an example, for societal benefit. But the system hasn't been designed that way. And I think you're right that the inputs may have been thought through in terms of the institutions and the legislative framework and the legal framework to get the institutions to function and the basic support that they can receive from government. But the pipe is not complete. The pipe is not complete. It's broken in between. And that's why I said we've got the institutions in place, but the value chain has not been connected. And that creates... Let's take Kiridi as an example. You see, Kiridi was created as a platform, not just as an institution. It is a platform. What that means is that any university who have created some kind of prototype, whether as faculty or student or generally as a university, can go to Kiridi and use it as a platform, as an incubation platform. Remember, I mentioned to you the levels from 1 to 9. So you're somewhere around level 3, 4. So you take your solutions and then we test them, we protect the intellectual property. That means you should quickly speak to Kipi or Kikobo or whoever and create this thing and see, it's potentially very viable. And then you're starting to speak to private sector. But how many universities will tell you that they have a working relationship with Kiridi? It's a platform, remember. It's not that it's non-existent. It is existent. But how many are leveraging it and are required to leverage or are facilitated to leverage? We do have a gap there. So as I said, the issue is value chain and the connections of the elements in the value chain.
Just the other day, you had a conversation with vice chancellors from various universities. What did you discover out of your conversation with them?
Okay, great. I'm glad you're following me. Why? Because I think the single most important stakeholder in the innovation ecosystem is universities. I'm not saying others are not, but I'm just saying the university is the single most important. Why? Because you have thousands and thousands of young people there, thousands and thousands of faculty members and researchers and labs and facilities and so on and so forth. Then another perspective I have is that the single most important resource person in the entire value chain of the innovation ecosystem is a vice chancellor. Why? Because this person has the influence on how thousands and thousands of young people will think, how thousands and thousands of researchers will think, and how they can leverage what they have for a greater future. That includes how we prioritize, how we teach, how we do the learning, how we improve the performance targets, and how we strategize within the institutions, and so on and so forth. So this is what I have for universities and vice chancellors. I'm currently working with about 14 of them in a very systematic way, and we're gradually expanding. We created, first of all, what we call
14 vice chancellors.
This is vice chancellors.
Are they from public or both public and private?
It is a mix. It is a mix because for us, a university is a university. So the first thing we've created is what we call a network of entrepreneur institution leaders. So from our standpoint is that every university is an entrepreneur ecosystem, and you have to build the culture around that. And we have created a council of this network, and it is chaired by the Vice Chancellor of University of Nairobi, assisted by the Vice Chancellor of Daystar. And the push we are putting forward is we need to organize ourselves more as entrepreneur ecosystems that are, in our own individual rights, and then we aggregate them into a national influence. Gradually, we are setting targets for each of the university as to what they must produce, whether as startups or as products that can be used by society.
And when we say we, you mean Kenya?
Yeah.
Or the government?
Is Kenya coordinating an effort within the universities.
On behalf of the government of Kenya?
On behalf of the government. So we are government. And after all, a number of these institutions are government, right? Now, we also realize that for you to succeed with innovations, leveraging these ecosystems, you do need a way of measuring progress. Now, we have created a maturity framework for entrepreneurial institutions, and we've agreed that, one, you've got to think through your leadership, the capacity of the leadership to think entrepreneurially, all right? Second is funding. Third is infrastructure. Fourth is culture. Fifth is the teaching and learning. It needs to be more and more entrepreneurial. We've agreed that we're going to sort out the issues of linkages and partnerships that are necessary for a stronger entrepreneurial ecosystem. Now, we did an evaluation of the 14, and I don't want to present results here, but we have created a framework that says you can either be level 1 or level 5. Level 5 being a global leader in entrepreneurship. So a global entrepreneurship leader. And then the basic one is a traditional teaching and learning. Out of the 14 universities, they did self-evaluation. I did not evaluate them. They did self-evaluation. We trained them on how to use the platform and how to get the evidence and how to analyze.
What did you discover?
All of them are either level 1 or level 2.
Level 1?
All the 14.
Or level 2.
And they all generally agreed that that's correct. Are we together? In terms of the entrepreneurial capacity of this institution, or potential, and the ability to exploit it. Now, then we've designed interventions for the institutions, because on an annual basis, we will start evaluating. We will keep evaluating and then kind of measuring the progress. And we've started designing interventions. For example, we designed a training program for vice chancellors. You know, many times you would think that vice chancellor doesn't need to go to school. Why? He's a professor and very established. But they all agree that there's something to learn. When you benchmark yourself against others globally and locally, you realize there's something to learn. So on leadership alone, we now have an intervention or capacity building for entrepreneurial leadership. That's what, I'm not saying a vice chancellor should be an entrepreneur. I am saying they need to be an entrepreneurial leader, which means they need to support other people and create the appropriate environment for entrepreneurship to thrive, all right? So that's an example, and we've started setting up innovation funds within universities. We're supporting the infrastructure development, teaching and learning interventions, and so on and so forth. So in a nutshell, what I have learned through working with these institutions is that there is a desire to actually to create solutions. there is a realization that there is a lot of ground to cover in terms of how they organize themselves to be more effective from an entrepreneurial leadership and impact perspective. And we've created a set of interventions, and we are gradually adding more and more. And what I can project, and there are some universities, by the way, I'll tell you what. We agreed out of the 14 universities that you will have to create a 3-year innovation master plan. Okay.
So they didn't even have an innovation master plan.
I mean, I have one intervention, by the way, of the many interventions around policy. Okay? Now, you'll be surprised that there are many institutions that don't have, I can't count any that had an innovation policy or strategy. I don't remember one. But you will find IP policy, research policy, and so forth. But you see, like I said...
And these are the universities that are training the Gen Z that are on the streets.
Thank you. You have asked that question. I don't need to answer because it's self-explanatory. You see, the issue we're struggling with is the value chain. We have to think through the value chain. That if I set up a research policy, what is the expected outcome? It's not just a publication. I need to think all the way to commercialization. For me to succeed with that, then I need to ensure that I have my IP policy in place, I have an innovation policy or commercialization policy. But there are a couple of universities that told me, actually, they've got a startup policy. A few of them. There are those that would tell me they've got a commercialization policy. So what we've started to do is to help the institutions to develop a master plan that will address all the gaps. And our job is to make sure that the gaps is a comprehensive process. So that over time now you start building innovations that really make sense in society, and they are supported to the very end. There are a few universities that told me they've got an innovation fund, and about 4 or 5 out of all of them.
Do we have any in the public sector?
Yeah. We've got some innovation funds in the university. For me, from an innovation agency standpoint, if the university does not have an innovation fund, then we are talking about just an upgraded high school.
Oh, Lord. Tell me things, OMWANSA, and I like your honesty.
We've got to be.
You see, you have thousands, if not millions of people, young people coming to the streets. And we saw... various innovations generated by these young people.
True.
And that confirms that there is a huge pool of innovators in our ecosystem.
Yeah.
What do we need to do as a country to tap this raw innovation energy, lest it goes to waste?
First and foremost, thanks very much. I mean, that's potential. What you're describing is potential. I had an opportunity to study the Global Innovation Index, which ranks countries globally, and we've got about 132 countries participating. Kenya currently ranks 100. But that's probably not the interesting part, because part of it is maybe because data was not submitted on time or correct data was not submitted and so on and so forth. But what is extremely interesting is how is that global innovation score generated? It is informed by some set of inputs that you put as a country. And there are about 5, and the outputs that you get. Now, this is the interesting part. Unlike many countries, the outputs for Kenya score higher than the inputs.
The outputs?
Yes. In other words, the outputs are not commensurate to the inputs, which means we have not put enough into the ecosystem to get the outputs. But shouldn't it surprise you that Kenyans are able to generate a lot of outputs, innovation outputs, despite weaker inputs? It's a very interesting conversation, and it's a wake-up call for me and many others that, hey, you know what? If we strengthen the inputs, we can significantly scale the outputs. Why? Because the people are very enterprising. The people want to do. We are willing to work with minimal resources to produce stuff, and that's why you have more outputs than commensurately higher than the inputs. So to then come to your question, you need to ask ourselves about the innovation ecosystem. Now, as an innovation agency, we're relatively young. It's been about 3 years or so of existence, and I've articulated to you where I thought our greatest intervention is going to be. You've got to take the following things. We've just designed a 10-year innovation master plan for Kenya. And we launched it in November in last year, where the head of state came to our Kenya Innovation Week on the 27th of November. It speaks to about 5 things that you must do. One is, I'll start with the last one. It's the policy atmosphere. So as it is right now, we actually don't have a national IP policy.
No, we don't.
So if you don't have the policy atmosphere, you're weaker. So anyway, there is policy, There's infrastructure. By infrastructure, we're talking about the spaces that people can use, the facilities, the equipment that they can use to actually convert their solutions into products of great value. Skills. You know, it's one thing to research, and it's another thing to create a product, and it's another thing to actually run an enterprise that is coming out of this research output. So you need a certain set of skills along the way. And I've had conversations of guys who come up with very meaningful products, but don't have the skills to create the enterprises.
Very good. What are the other two?
Now, the other two is access to funding and then access to market.
OMWANSA,
yes.
Because I can see we're almost coming to the end of this conversation. I mean, it would be unjustified for us to come here and discuss the challenges that we are facing as a nation.
Yes.
Because let's face it, I mean, this is our country, we are Kenyans.
Yeah.
And we must also come up with solutions. We must be part of the solution process. What do we need to do to catalyze innovation in this country?
Okay. So I'll still go back into the inputs that we know, the things that we must continue to do. I'm not saying we're not doing anything, but I think we need to put more intensity to it. The availability and utilization of the infrastructure that we have to facilitate the movement of these ideas from the basic level into greater commercial value. Infrastructure is something we must continue to invest. Access to funding, please don't oversimplify it, because ideas are nurtured and you need to prototype, you need to test, you need to validate, and that's going to have a cost implication.
And we have the National Research Fund.
We do have the National Research Fund, but as we started, what is a resource pool that the fund has? I am a board member of the National Research Fund, and I can give you the exact numbers.
What are the numbers?
Now, well, the numbers are at that 0.08%, and we need to move to the 2%.
To the 2%.
That's the principle. In order for you to penetrate the ecosystem and fund as much. And by the way, people sometimes think that funding research and innovation is because a number of ideas are going to collapse anyway, then it's not worth it. I'll tell you what. When you fund ideas, and even when they collapse, people learn how not to do things. You create jobs as a result of even that prototyping itself. So it's absolutely worth it. I think we have an opportunity to strengthen our policy environment, and we are working quite aggressively on that, and exposing people to markets in order for them to thrive, and continue building skills that enable people to develop ideas that become commercially viable. You know, every so often you might hear some people, yeah, I've got some amazing idea here. But for that idea to become commercially viable is quite some hard work, requires skills, funding, policy atmosphere, and the necessary support. So all I am saying as an innovation agency CEO, the effort around those 5 pillars must continue. Second, we must think about the value chain end to end, not stopping along the way. That means we need to link these institutions to deliver the results. Finally, we've got to incentivize commercialization. That bit is missing.
Commercialization of innovation.
Exactly.
TONNY OMWANSA, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Inside Government, and of course, sharing your insight with us.
Thank you very much for having me, and I think this is a conversation that we must continue on a regular basis and show the progress that we are making. And otherwise, it's a one-off.
And we'll continue to have this kind of conversations.
Thank you very much.
Very good. I mean, you see, show me any country in the world that ever developed without research and innovation. We don't have any. All the big powers, from China to United States to Singapore to Dubai, they developed on the basis of research and innovation. My name is OBRIEN. You have been watching Inside Government. Thank you for your time. Good afternoon.